In the back corner of a pawn shop in Ohio, a gold wedding ring sits under glass with a ticket number instead of a name. Its owner has 90 days to return. The strange part is that most people who pawn something like this could sell it outright for more money. They almost never do. And the reason says something uncomfortable about how you value the things you already own. Most people think a pawn shop is where desperation goes to die. A last resort, a place for people who ran out of options. But if you spend enough time watching what actually happens across that counter, a different pattern shows up. People aren't just trading objects for cash, they're negotiating with their own memory. And the loan is almost never the real transaction. The real transaction is happening somewhere else entirely, and you'll see exactly where in a moment. Here's what a pawnbroker does that almost nobody else in finance does. They lend you money based on an object, not your credit score, not your income, not your promises. The ring, the guitar, the power tools in your garage. If you don't pay it back, they keep it. No court, no collections call, no mark on your file, just a clean, cold exchange of value for value. It should be the simplest transaction in the world. It isn't. Because here's the thing economists have known for decades and most people never notice about themselves. The moment you own something, you start overvaluing it. Psychologist and Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman ran an experiment in the 1990s where he handed people a coffee mug, then asked how much they'd sell it for. People who'd just been given the mug wanted roughly twice as much money as people who were simply asked what they'd pay to buy the same mug fresh, same object, same room, same minute. Only difference was who currently held it in their hands. That's not a mug problem. That's a you problem. It's called the endowment effect, and it means the second something becomes yours, its value inflates inside your head, whether or not it inflates anywhere else. Now put that mug in a pawn shop, except it's not a mug, it's your father's watch. It's the guitar you learned 3 chords on in 9th grade. It's a ring from a wedding that didn't work out. The appraiser behind the counter looks at gold weight, market resale, condition, cold numbers. You look at the same object and see a Tuesday afternoon in 2009 that you can't get back. 2 people staring at the same ring, doing completely different math. That gap between what a thing is worth and what it means to you is where every pawn shop in the country makes its living. And it's about to explain something about your own bank account. Richard Thaler, the economist who spent his career studying exactly this kind of irrational math, called it mental accounting. Your brain doesn't treat money as one big neutral pool. It sorts it into little boxes with invisible labels: rent money, fun money, sentimental money. $1 sitting in your savings account is not treated the same as $1 tied up in your grandmother's necklace, even though $1 is $1 everywhere else in the universe. The necklace dollar gets protected, guarded, 90 days of interest payments guarded sometimes rather than simply sold. That's the first warning sign most people miss. There were 3 of them hiding in this story, and you've probably lived through at least one without noticing. Walk into almost any pawn shop and ask the owner what percentage of loans actually get reclaimed. In a typical shop, it sits somewhere around 70 to 80%. Most people do come back for their stuff. That number surprises people who assume pawning something is basically the same as selling it. It isn't, not in the customer's mind. In their mind, they're renting time, buying themselves 90 days to fix a problem so the object never has to actually leave the family. You've probably done this exact thing this week and didn't notice. Not with a ring. With a subscription you forgot to cancel because canceling felt like admitting defeat. With a stock, you refused to sell at a loss even though every rational model said to sell it. With a relationship, a job, an old apartment lease, you weren't protecting the object, you were protecting the story you'd already told yourself about what the object meant. A pawn shop just makes that story visible with a ticket number and an interest rate attached. Here's where it gets stranger. Economist Anna Maria Lusardi has spent years studying financial literacy across the country. And one of her more uncomfortable findings is that people with lower financial knowledge aren't just worse at math. They're more likely to make decisions driven entirely by emotional attachment rather than calculation, because the math was never the tool they were using in the first place. A pawn shop doesn't create that gap. It just sits directly on top of it 3 times a day, every single day, cash in one hand and memory in the other. So picture the counter again. A woman brings in a saxophone that belonged to her late husband. The appraiser offers $400 outright or $150 as a loan she can repay with interest and take the saxophone home again. On paper, the outright sale is the better deal. More money, no strings, done in 5 minutes. She takes the loan almost every time. Not because she's bad at arithmetic, because the saxophone was never really an asset to her. It was a proxy for a person, and you cannot put a resale price on a person, even when someone behind a glass counter is quietly trying to. This is the twist buried underneath the whole business model, and it's worth saying plainly. A pawnshop doesn't profit primarily because people are desperate. It profits because people are sentimental, and sentiment is remarkably, reliably slow to sell at the right price. Desperation gets people in the door. Sentiment is what keeps the interest payments coming for 90 days instead of walking out with the outright cash and starting over clean. Which raises the real question sitting underneath everything you've just heard. If sentiment can quietly cost a stranger $300 on a saxophone, what is it costing you right now in the accounts you check on your phone? The apartment you can't afford but won't downsize because moving would feel like losing. The car payment on a car that reminds you of a version of yourself you don't want to let go of. You don't need a pawn counter for the endowment effect to run your decisions. Your bank app does the same job, quietly, every day, without a ticket number. Robert Shiller, another Nobel laureate who spent his career studying how emotion moves through financial markets, has made a version of this same point about entire economies. Markets don't just price assets based on their fundamentals. They price them based on stories people tell each other about what those assets mean, and those stories can hold a price up or crush it long after the numbers stopped agreeing. A pawnshop is that same phenomenon, shrunk down to the size of a ring in a velvet box. The story is the price. The story just happens to be more visible when it's your father's watch instead of a share of stock. Here's the part almost nobody expects walking in. The people who run these shops aren't the villains of this story. Most of them will tell you, if you actually ask, that they'd rather see the loan repaid than keep the item. A watch sitting in a case earns them nothing. A repaid loan with interest is the actual business. So the pawnbroker isn't hoping you fail to pay. He's hoping you come back on day 89 with cash in hand and the same relieved look on your face every single time. In a strange way, he understands your sentimental attachment better than your own bank does because his entire business model depends on respecting it instead of ignoring it. And that's the real lesson sitting behind the counter underneath the neon sign and the guitars on the wall. Money was never only a number. If it were, nobody would ever choose a $150 loan over a $400 sale. The saxophone woman isn't irrational, she's human, running the exact same software Kahneman found in a room full of strangers holding coffee mugs. The only difference is the stakes are dressed up as gold and vinyl instead of ceramic. So the next time you catch yourself refusing to sell something, cancel something, or let go of something that's clearly not serving you anymore, picture that glass counter. Picture the ticket number where a name used to be. Ask yourself the same question every pawnbroker silently asks every customer who walks through that door. Are you protecting an asset, or are you protecting a memory wearing an asset's clothes? Most of the time, if you're honest, you already know the answer. You just needed someone behind a counter, 90 days on a clock, to finally make you look at it. Because in the back corner of that shop in Ohio, the ring is still sitting under glass. Its owner will probably come back for it, pay the interest, and take it home again, not because it was ever the smart financial move, but because some things were never actually about the money in the first place. Neither, if you're honest with yourself, are half the decisions sitting in your own accounts right now.